Right now, 10 years, thousands of casualties, and trillions of dollars later, the question that America asks is, was Iraq worth it? And next, Nanny Blumey at it again. This time, he wants to hide the cigarettes from the kiddies. Is he right that out of sight will mean out of mind? And later, John Liu, still in the mayoral race. The question is, this guy really got a chance of winning? Our strategy team, they read the tea leaves. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks for joining us this Tuesday evening, March 19th. We've got a conversation with Senator Gillibrand coming up as well. Now, we have now hit, if you look at the calendar, the 10-year mark since the Iraq War began. And since then, the world has, as we know, changed here in many ways. But the question remains, when it comes to Iraq and all the division that was, if we remember what 2003 was like, was it all worth it? And I want to bring Andrew Whitman in right now, who joins us with a look back at what happened in those 10 years. And we've got some poll numbers, too, to show just how conflicted the American public still is about it.
Yeah, Richard, and if today's anniversary is any indication, there are still serious questions about whether the Iraq War was worth it, as the day, at least in Iraq, was marked by a wave of deadly bombings. It was another bloody day in Iraq, marking the 10th anniversary of the U.S.-led invasion. Local officials say at least 56 people were killed, more than 200 wounded in bombings across Baghdad and nearby towns. The attack served as a grim reminder of just how unstable the country remains. 10 years after the invasion, some parts of Iraq are thriving, but religious tension threatens to plunge the nation into greater violence and chaos. The U.S. invasion of Iraq transformed American politics. President George W. Bush's decision to invade Iraq and remove Saddam Hussein proved costly. 4,488 American troops were lost. While 3 months into the war, President Bush declared the mission accomplished. It would continue for years. President Obama was elected to his first term in 2008 on a promise to end the Iraq War. To this day, debate continues about whether it was worth it. A recent poll found 53% of Americans now believe the war was a mistake. U.S. Representative Tulsi Gabbard is an Iraq veteran.
The experience completely changed my life and was a very big motivator in recognizing what are the true costs of war.
Despite missteps, some think the removal of Saddam Hussein gave the Iraqi people an incredible opportunity.
We really did give them an opportunity. And today we have in Iraq, we have a partner, not an adversary.
The last American combat troops left Iraq in December of 2011, but caring for the 1.5 million Americans who served in that war will last decades into the future. Now, the exact costs of the war in both blood and treasure are difficult to estimate, but earlier today I spoke with someone who's been writing about this extensively. Here's just a portion of my interview with Daniel Trotta, a Reuters correspondent who's been covering the Iraq War. Let's start with the search for a silver lining, if we could. We know about WMDs and the lack of any in Iraq, but we also heard before the war that it would create a stable, pro-American ally that would be a beachhead for democracy in the region and would stop Al-Qaeda. Any indication that we succeeded on any of those fronts in our 10 years in Iraq?
Well, I think the best case scenario that you can look at is what one former Defense Department official told me, which was that the United States ended up fighting Iraq or Al-Qaeda Central in Iraq. That is, after the U.S. invasion drew jihadists and other foreign fighters into Iraq, the United States was able to engage them in combat, and under this best case scenario was able to defeat them militarily in Iraq. Of course, other critics would say that's a bit foolhardy to suggest that as a victory, because Al-Qaeda wasn't really present in Iraq before then. But that's one best case scenario that you could look at. Another is simply the fact that Saddam Hussein is no longer in power, and many Iraqis can cheer that fact. But yes, obviously there were many unintended consequences from the invasion that the U.S. now regrets.
Can you give us a thumbnail as to how much the Iraq War has cost the United States?
Well, to date, the latest estimate from the Watson Institute for International Studies puts the figure at $2.2 trillion. Now, that's money spent out of the U.S. Treasury or already committed to, for example, medical and disability payments to veterans. The United States will be paying those costs for the next 40 or 50 years or so as those veterans age, just as today we're still paying those costs for Vietnam War veterans or even survivors of World War II. Now, on top of that, you have to consider that the entire Iraq War was paid for by deficit spending. So on top of that $2.2 trillion, there will be interest. So unless the United States is able to balance its budget in the near future, we are looking at potentially trillions, that's right, trillions of dollars in interest over the next 40 to 50 years. It could reach as high as $6 trillion. Now, of course, that's based on a number of assumptions, conservative assumptions regarding interest rates and the state of the U.S. Budget deficit. But those costs there are enormous. Now, that's just the dollar side. In Iraq, the best estimates are on the neighborhood of 176 to 189,000 dead. Approximately 134,000 civilians, Iraqi civilians, according to the Watson Institute estimate. Now, that figure is considered to be an undercount. Those are the numbers that they can actually document. But there is an accepted principle in wartime casualties that there are at least twice as many indirect deaths. That is, as a result of infrastructure, hospitals being degraded, roads in porous condition leading to more road accidents, diseases that could otherwise easily be treated. Those numbers could be as much as, well, as little as twice that figure. Some people put those numbers up to 10 or 20 times. I think that may be a bridge too far.
What can you tell us about the stability of Iraq itself today and going forward?
Well, I guess you could say that it's more stable than was thought at the height of the war in 05 and 06, when no one was sure what was going to happen. It looked like Iraq could have totally spun off into chaos. That said, there is still a terrific amount of sectarian violence in Iraq, and the government itself is considered to be highly corrupt, the Maliki government. So while, yes, it's better than perhaps what may have existed with Saddam Hussein at this point, clearly the scenario of being greeted as liberators and a newborn democracy did not come to fruition as had been hoped. I happened to be in Iraq shortly after the fall of Saddam about 10 years ago, and I remember witnessing the first beginnings of this, and literally it was Iraqis voting for local city council by putting pieces of paper in a soldier's helmet, now in a U.S. soldier's helmet. Now that electoral process has certainly advanced, and the elections themselves are of a fairly high standard, relatively and historically speaking. But as far as the other accoutrements of democracy, I think Iraq has a long way to go.
You know, as we try to analyze whether the price was worth it 10 years since the start of the war, I get the sense from everything you've told us that you don't think we're going to know exactly what the total cost of this war was for decades to come. Is that a fair assessment of where you're looking back 10 years later?
I think that's a fair assessment, and I also think that the policymakers who made the decision to go to war probably would not have made the decision if they knew then what they know now. I was able to speak with one of Donald Rumsfeld's aides who told me just that if the war had been half as long or cost half as much as it turned out to have cost, that the U.S. would not have invaded.
All right, Andrew, good interview here. Let's bring our table and our panel. We start with Jessica Proud, as Republican strategist, Vice President, NLO Strategies. Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist and author. And Scott Levinson, Democratic political consultant and president of the Advance Group. And Andrew, obviously, we all met. Okay, anybody at the table think, with the benefit of hindsight, that Iraq was worth it? Yeah. Don't knock me down all at once here.